So Chris, welcome back. It's great to see your face this time.
Thank you. It is.
So last time we kind of got in the weeds of the autonomics, but I thought it was an important conversation to have. It sounds like it's not something that you've been having a lot, as much as talking about the actual mechanism of the process of detoxification. But that the thing that I really picked up on from hearing you speak before was that that autonomic system to be working optimally is the important part of what really helps all the processes, especially if we're going to be starting to put stuff into the system. We're trying to move stuff through a system. So yeah, I wanted to go into
the autonomics. It's like putting barriers up to the on ramps to the highway. Why isn't there anyone on the highway? Well, because all the ramps are blocked. And if they're open, then we can speed up everything. We can work on lubricating the wheels of the detoxification system. And if they're closed, doesn't matter what you do, you're just going to be pushing against a barrier.
Yeah. So take us through what one of your specialties has been working on, moving mercury through the system. But I have a few other questions that maybe you can answer, and also just kind of talking about what to do in terms of lifestyle and just boosting this function. So let's start with mercury, because that's what you have a patent for with your products, and also you struggled with this as a problem as well for yourself.
Yeah. So you want me to lead you through the process of detoxification?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to look mechanistically. We're going to start inside a cell. What are the reactions that go on? How do you get from inside the cell to outside of the body? So it'll be this kind of relay race that we talk about, this baton handoff. So I like to frame like the microcosm and the macrocosm of detoxification. The microcosm being cellular reactions that are pushing things out of the cell, out into the periphery, that being the lymphatics, in the extracellular matrix, to the lymph, to the blood. And then filtration. So the larger macrocosmic side is filtration. And that's pulling from the blood into the liver, out of the liver, into the bile, and into the GI, or from the blood into the proximal tubules of the kidney, and then into the urinary stream. So now go back to the cell. So how does this all work in the cell? So mercury is going to be in the cell. It's not going to be floating around as a free ion. It's going to be bound onto a sulfhydryl or a selenium group on a protein or an enzyme there, or maybe a sulfur group on a membrane. And so it's stuck onto something there, and we have something in the cell called glutathione. Now, we're going to get the mercury off of the protein onto the glutathione. Now, to do that, you have to have enough glutathione. So we got some prerequisites. One is we've got enough glutathione. Now, does the mercury just jump off the protein onto the glutathione? No. You need something to pry in a little bit and change the electron distribution so it wants to grab on over onto the glutathione. So you have something called glutathione S-transferase. So the S-transferase is shifting that electron distribution and getting the mercury to bond to the glutathione. Now you're inside the cell. Now you're a mercury glutathione conjugate. Now the significance of that is it's nice and water soluble, so it can freely move around. And it's got a charge and a structure that's recognizable by transmembrane transporters that push it out of the cell. These are called multi-drug resistance proteins. Now, people will talk about phases of detox, and there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. In this, there's actually no phase 1. Phase 1 is actually for more of the fat-soluble toxins and things that aren't very reactive. And that's often called the cytochrome P450 system. And they'll make the chemical like a PCB reactive. Now, mercury is already reactive, so we pick up at phase 2. Phase 2 is that conjugation, the linking of the glutathione onto the mercury. Phase 3 is the transport out of the cell. All right, so link it to glutathione, push it out of the cell. Link, push, link, push. That's the cellular level. Now we're in the blood. Well, technically we're in the extracellular matrix, to the lymph, to the blood. But now we're moving through the blood. Now we got a filter. And phase 3, now these transporters pick up there. And just as a side note, the transporters use ATP, cellular energy, and magnesium to do the transport. So this is part of the need for magnesium and part of why it takes energy to detox. And this goes back to the autonomics too. So autonomics are all prioritization. So if you're in fight or flight, your prioritization of use of your ATP is into fight or flight processes, and it is pushed away from these processes of cleaning up and regenerating. These are luxury things that can happen when you're not about to be killed. All right, so and that's also why you get a little bit more tired when you detox. All right, so in our story, we're out in the blood, we're circulating about. Now, phase 3 is going to pick up at the liver. We're going to pull this conjugate, this mercury glutathione conjugate, from the blood into the hepatocyte, the liver cell. And then it is going to be pushed out the other side of the liver cell into the bile canalicculus. So that is like the rootlet of the bile tree. So bile is this green fluid that comes out of the liver. And we're used to this idea of this common bile duct and the gallbladder storing bile and then releasing it in bolus doses when we eat. But the filling up of the gallbladder, the draining of this green fluid is happening all the time. Yeah. So if you looked up into the liver, you'd see it's like an upside down tree, and it's like roots of the tree are the bile tree or the bile roots going up into the hepatocyte, and then they break into finer and finer rootlets, and these fine rootlets are called the canaliculi. Okay. And every single cell in the liver is fed on one side by blood and drained on the other side by bile, and that's the directionality. We talk about right directionality, that being pull from the blood, dump into the bile. Dump into the bile. So what we're saying there is that the bile is the drainage mechanism for the liver. It is the drainage. So when we talk about the old naturopathic ideas of drainage remedies, for the kidneys, you have things that make you pee more, diuretics. For the liver, you have cholagogues, things that make you secrete bile. So the transporters that move the toxin out of the hepatocyte into the bile also move bile. And there's two. One is the MRP2, multi-drug resistance peptide 2, and the other is the BSEP, the bile salt export pump. So the MRP moves toxins and bile, the BSEP moves only bile. Those two are like twins. They upregulate and downregulate together. Okay. Meaning, cholestasis, or failure to move bile out of the liver cells, is toxostasis. That's keeping toxins in. Yeah. So if we stop that process, and this is where the most common nexus of the breakdown of detox is right at that transition between the liver cell and the bile tree. So those are secreted all the time, and the toxins are moving with the bile. They build up in the gallbladder, and when you eat, they squeeze out. Right. So what are the things that block that flow of toxins and bile out of the liver? Well, inflammatory states do that. And so inflammagens, especially endotoxin that we get from leaky gut, we get it from periodontitis, we get it from jawbone infections, root canal infections, we get it from UTIs, bladder infections. All these are sources of endotoxin, which are little parts of bacteria that wind up inflammation. So inflammation is sort of like a cellular fight or flight. It says, turn down all this stuff. Right. It also turns up, when you turn up inflammation, you're going into a pro-oxidant mode because your immune system uses superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, peroxyl radicals, hypochlorous acid, all these pro-oxidants to fight invaders. And so when it does that, it downregulates your antioxidant system. And detoxification, we're talking about glutathione, your main antioxidant. Detox is within the antioxidant system. So inflammagens stop that. Just being in fight or flight, in sympathetic, stops that. We don't, because again, this is digestion and detoxification linked by bile flow. Bile is for digestion. Bile is the carrier of the detox stuff. So when you go into fight or flight, you don't want to eat. I got to run away from the goddamn lion here. I don't have time to stop and eat. That's luxury stuff when everything calms down. You know, you go get a massage, you get some acupuncture, you come out, you're like, I'm sleepy and hungry.
Yeah.
You're ready to nourish the body again. So fight or flight breaks that. So we're chronically in fight or flight. We're chronically breaking the detox cycle. Now, another thing that feeds into that is your hormone balance. Now, think more on women. Estrogen it can create that cholestasis all on its own. That's why it happens a lot during pregnancy, the cholestasis of pregnancy. Now, reflexively, what does the estrogen do to the brain? Estrogen stimulates the glutamate receptors. That's the excitotoxin. So in the fight or flight versus rest digest, the sympathetic fight or flight is associated with the neurotransmitter glutamate, your primary excitatory neurotransmitter. Whereas rest, digest, repair, regenerate, detoxify, parasympathetic is GABA, your main inhibitory. Now, glutamate is good for being on it. It's good for having memory of what kills you and where food is. And so it's part of the survival mechanism. But estrogen hyperwinds that. And when that goes too much, you get anxiety. You can get some brain fog from the neuroinflammation there, and it puts you in fight or flight. And so what happens when you're estrogen dominant and progesterone weak? You're irritable and grumpy, and you're in fight or flight. Yeah. And then the opposite of that, what's the thing that stimulates the hormone that stimulates the GABA receptors? It's progesterone. Now, if you taste these two, estrogen, has a little bit of a taste, but progesterone is bitter as all get up. And bitter compounds are the things that open and flow the liver. And so often, this happens, the menopausal women get a lot of toxicity issues. They got a lot of mercury toxicity in menopause. So you're trying to harmonize all this thing, but you're always telling women, get on progesterone because it opens up and flows your liver and calms down your autonomics at the same time. So to me, it's a beautiful thing to see this reflexivity between the brain and the liver and how you work on these opposite poles. You either block or open it up, just like you block or open up your mind. So now we talk about things that are blocking. So we have to keep the inflammagens down. We have to keep leaky gut taken care of. We need the hormone balance. We can use things like traditional bitters, like things like cocktail bitters. And this would be gentian and myrrh and dandelion and cassia. All these things in your traditional bitters formulations help that flow going on. Phosphatidylcholine also is one of the things. There's another transporter that moves phosphatidylcholine into the bile flow, keeps the bile flow liquid. So choline deprivation gives you cholestasis very quickly. This is why we like to supplement with phosphatidylcholine, and we make all our delivery systems, these liposomes and nanoemulsions, feature lots of phosphatidylcholine. And that's both because it builds membranes, and membranes are crucial to all this. Maybe we can come back later to talking about membranes, and also because it flows the bile. All right, so now we've done stuff. We've got toxins out of the cell into the blood. We get them through the liver into the GI. Now, what can go wrong at this point is you can reabsorb all that. So you dump it into the GI, and then the toxin reabsorbs. In the case of let's say methylmercury from fish, you're going to conjugate that to, first you eat methylmercury from fish. Now, it's a quiz for you. Is the methylmercury in the muscle or the fat of the fish?
I'm going to guess it's in the muscle.
Ah, damn. This is my cue where you say fat. All the toxins are in the fat. And I go, wrong. But you got it right. So fats, it's really easy. Fat-soluble toxins are in the fat.
That's what I was trying to figure out, which one it was soluble.
Like, wait, which is it? And there is the common misconception that methylmercury is fat-soluble, and it's really not. It's bound. Remember, we said it binds to sulfur groups.
Yeah.
The quintessential sulfur group on the proteins comes from cysteine.
Okay.
So there's this funny thing that when methylmercury binds to cysteine, it is a molecular mimic for methionine, another essential amino acid, right? And so when it's in the protein structure, it's a cysteine in the protein structure, and the sulfhydryl has the methylmercury. That's why it's in the muscle.
Yeah.
Then when you eat it and you hydrolyze this down to amino acids, the methylmercury sticks on the cysteine. It doesn't let go. So your body then thinks it's methionine, and you get a 95% uptake efficiency across amino acid transporters into the blood. Also across amino acid transporters into the brain, across the placental barrier. In fact, that's why the baby's got 30% higher mercury level than the mother, because you're pumping in so much protein.
Okay.
All right. So then you recognize the methylmercury, you conjugate glutathione to it, you put it down into the bile, and while it's going through that and getting into the GI, transpeptidases break the cysteine away from the glutathione, because the cysteine is the sulfur on the glutathione that's binding things. So what you're left with in the GI tract is methylmercury cysteine. Same thing you absorb from the fish. Boom, comes right back in. Now, not every toxin does this, but methylmercury is like 90 to 95% reuptake efficiency.
Okay.
So that one's a hard one to drain down. Cadmium has a lot of reuptake. Mold toxins are notorious for reuptake. And then across the spread of the supertoxins, it varies.
And when you say drain down, what is that? Where is that going?
Oh, from the liver through the bile tree and into the upper small intestine.
Okay. Okay.
So right where the bile dumps, you're dumping your bile and your toxins.
Okay.
So people will talk about toxic bile. Oh, I've got toxic bile. That just means there's a lot of toxins that keep recirculating.
Gotcha.
And the bile's built up with these things that you're just not draining.
Yep. So
what happens is when it dumps into the GI, you want a binder there to grab it away from the bile. And so there's different binders for different types of toxins. We have one that's a little high surface area silica gel with tons of these sulfhydryl groups like you find on the glutathione on it. And so when it comes down, this just gloms onto the mercury and drains it off. So then you're breaking or shunting that recirculation and bringing it down to fecal excretion. Now, for other toxins, maybe charcoal is better, or clays or zeolites are better. There's something called chitosan, which is not, it's an analergic, but is derived from shellfish. All these are different kinds of binders. Even just soluble fiber, insoluble fiber is a binder. So we put a cocktail of binders together. We have something called Ultra Binder. It has this cocktail of binders that grabs everything, all right, so that you get it all the way out. So to make all this work and speed it all up, you got to get your glutathione levels up. You need to hit some cellular triggers that upregulate the speed of the conjugation in the cell and upregulate the speed of the transporters kicking out of the cell, pulling into the liver and dumping into the bile flow. And so, you know, in our system, we give you a liposome. We do all this delivery technology. We do these lipid nanoparticles that absorb right across the oral mucosa, and you get high blood levels really quick. And so we have a liposome of glutathione to get more glutathione out to the cells. Then we have something aptly named liver sauce, which has a couple programs in it. It has traditional bitters to stimulate the bile flow. It has what's called an NRF2 upregulator, which hits all the gene sets for the phase 2 and the phase 3 to turn up the transcription of the genes there. That's lipoic acid. It has some inflammatory modulators that calm down mast cell activity, so you're not having allergic reactions to everything that you're moving, because allergic reactions wind up inflammation, block detoxification. Right. So we got mast cell stabilization, bioflow movement, NRF2 upregulation, all together at once, glutathione coming in on the side. That gets you to kick things out of the blood, grab them through the liver, move them out. And this all, the absorption of these things all peaks in the blood between 20 and 30 minutes, really 15 and 30 minutes. So mobilizes all this stuff, and 30 minutes after you take it, you take your binder blend, your ultra binder, and you catch everything there. So it gets dumped into the GI, gets caught there, and goes all the way out.
Okay.
Now, on an autonomic level, when you're taking all that stuff to turn up detox, you're going to throw in an autonomic balancer. So we typically use CBD or GABA or a blend of the two. Those are the best things. Bringing CBD and GABA into our detox system just changed the scope of it. We would do it with a lot of autism, a lot of Lyme cases, mold cases. Anything you give them winds up inflammation, and they're already hypersympathetic. And you give them this CBD, and you just see everything just kind of settle down. Yeah. And then, and right behind it goes all the detox stimulants, and then everything flows out, and then you bind it all up, and you just had this short little episode of detox that's been softened by the GABA and the CBD. And because it's so fast to dump out, and then the binder picks everything up, you just tie a little bow on it, and it doesn't perpetuate through the day. So you do that once a day. You do it twice a day. You do it 3 times. You could do different doses, but it's a very tied together and linked system that works real well.
So how do people usually find out that they have a mercury toxicity issue? And is there a, I know that there's testing that people do, but what are the common symptomatic pieces that start to, alert people?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you put it in both ways. We can do testing, which we do offer testing. We get away from the old challenge testing where you take a chelator and see what you pee out. Yeah. We just measure blood, hair, and urine. We separate different forms of mercury, methyl and inorganic, get a disposition in the body, and but what you don't know is a level that's toxic for you might be good for me, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And that resistance to it is a very dynamic thing. Even what you're fine with 1 month, the next year, your system can be so down that it'll be really toxic for you. So knowing the symptomology is a really important thing to knowing whether this is a problem for you. Mm-hmm. So dominant, you have neurological and physiological symptoms. The neurological ones are very characteristic. Anxiety is the major one of them, because back to that glutamate thing. So the mercury is toxic to the glutamate receptors and makes the glutamate receptors hyperactive. Yeah. So even though the level of glutamate may not be high, the reactivity to it is really high. Yeah. And in fact, in neurotoxicity, you'll see lesions on the glutamate receptors. And so it winds that up. It'll wind up a certain paranoia because of the anxiety being on all the time. Yeah. And it's really, when I first got into it, there was this really interesting reaction. Some people would come up to me and they'd be like looking at me kind of furtively, and then like, so I hear about mercury toxicity. And I'm like, yeah, I do. I think you're toxic, but I'm not going to say that yet. And they say, so I kind of think maybe I might have something. And I'd be like, fuck yeah, you do. And
I've seen this before.
Oh yeah. And they're like, so what do you think? And I'm like, yeah. And you ask them 1 or 2 questions, and you're like, yeah, I think we should check into that with you, because I'm thinking that this could be an issue for you. And then they look at you like, holy shit, what are you saying? And then they just bolt. They're like, how could you say that? And I'm like, because it's obvious. So they want to know, but they're paranoid, and they don't trust you if you say yes, and they don't trust you if you say no, and they run away. So you said you've seen that one.
I have seen it, yeah, and I've done some work with autism, with Lyme, and most specifically. But then there's always and mold, and there's always some other things going on, and you never know whether there's also levels of other things. So I didn't realize that paranoia was part of that, but I've totally seen that exact thing you're talking about.
It's part of that nexus, and there's sort of a weird genius that can come from it. Yeah. Some of our notables that were really mercury toxic would be Newton and Mozart. They even measured them, they like dug them up and, measured them, and they were really high. Mozart, because they kept treating him for syphilis because he was kind of a whore, and Newton was an alchemist, and they would distill mercury, and if you kept distilling mercury, it would turn. They would bind it onto gold and distill it off, and they thought they were turning it into gold. So these guys would poison themselves, and Paracelsus used to make fun of them all. They're like, don't mess with that stuff. There's he only had one application for mercury. So you got these neurological aspects, and then the physical ones are mostly, I call it, it's too bad the term lead blanket is associated with lead, but it's just heaviness on the system. So it's tiredness, and that's happening at a mitochondrial level where mercury is heavily damaging the antioxidant system in the mitochondria. The mitochondria have all these respiratory bursts, have very high pro-oxidant activity, yet they have to be kept incredibly reduced. They're more reduced than the cytoplasm is. And so they have to have a very elaborate, very robust antioxidant system in there. And mercury binds to the main enzymes in there and destroys them. And you keep having to throw them out and make new ones. And so you have damage to the mitochondria that way. There's a lot of, in fact, mercury poisoning of the mitochondria lowers the density of the mitochondria in the cell, lowers the activity of the mitochondria. Most of that is catalyzed by lowering the NAD levels. And NAD is one of the key things for keeping the antioxidant system rebuilt. And so it's bringing down glutathione levels, thyroidoxin levels, NAD levels. It's damaging the membranes. This is resulting in less and less mitochondria in there. And so there's all this cellular level of energy production down. Then at an organismic level, the thyroid, it's blocking T4 to T3 conversion. Labs, you'll see a mid to elevated T4 with a mid to decreased T3. So, they're not in the same part of the reference range. And mercury and cadmium and arsenic are the most notables for that. And so you're not able to generate energy at that thyroid level, which is really dictating how fast your metabolism's running. And then at a kidney/adrenal level, you get a lot of buildup of mercury in the kidneys. And there's this, there's always adrenal depletion in these people, along with an inflammation in the liver. So the biggest buildups are kidney and liver. And so the liver gets overinflamed and overtaxed, and a lot of this mercury gets dumped in there. It's affecting the antioxidant system there. It's blocking detox in there while it's doing similar in the kidney. So in Chinese medicine, you'd have deficient kidney, excess liver, wasted out, but really irritable, irritable, prone to anger and stuff, which goes back to the brain and the neurotransmission bias over to the glutamate side, which is your more explosive side.
Back to the thyroid. So because I treat babies and work with a lot of pregnant women, is there a piece of that you think is related to why women have so many problems post-pregnancy with thyroid? Is there any relationship? Could we identify that there could be something going on toxicity-wise that triggers some sort of thyroid problem?
Yeah, I bet you could. Especially so, depending upon, maybe it's related to what their dietary inputs on there. So you're going to be cranking over a ton of food, right? Now you're going to be eating for two. You're just, and the same thing happens to the bodybuilders and stuff. They're cranking over tons of protein. So what's your protein source? What's the toxin in there? And, certain ones will have a lot of mercury. So if they're eating a lot of fish during pregnancy, they're going to have a big buildup of mercury, and a lot of that's going to go into the thyroid. And then the baby comes out, and all that growth hormone and all that stimulatory stuff goes away, and boom, you're left putting out milk, and you're left with this huge load in the thyroid. Other foods are very arsenic rich. Other foods are cadmium rich. Waters can be lead rich. And so, and then there's all the other toxins. So just that high throughput of food. So it makes it even more important to have a very clean food source. You got to be eating organic, but organic fish, just no, the inputs aren't regulated there.
Right.
So there it's the size of the fish. And so this is the thing that people miss. They're like, oh, I can't eat fish, but I have to eat fish. And so they throw it up. They're like, oh, I can't even think about it. There is 1,000-fold difference in mercury levels from the bottom of the food chain to the top of the food chain. So if you're eating anchovies, and anchovies, let's say sardines, they're not as polarizing. Sardines have tons of natural vitamin D, natural vitamin A, tons of nucleic acids. They got the minerals. You're eating the little bones. They got the skin, like everything's going on in the sardine. And in parts per billion, they might have 1 to 10 parts per billion mercury. Now take yourself up to the top of the food chain. Let's look at a swordfish. Now there'll be 1 to 10 parts per million, which is 1,000-fold higher. So that's 1 to 10,000 parts per billion. So, you have this 1 to 10,000-fold difference between these fish you can eat down here and the fish up here. And then you've got everything in between. And there's a lot of FDA lists. I really like wild salmon. You keep the smaller ones, the sockeye, coho, pink. Keep king for more intermittent use, that's higher. And then as you get to tuna, just don't eat much tuna. And the big tuna, the big, really good sushi tuna, that's really high. And then the small, skipjack and chunk light, they're lower mercury. So you can make rational decisions on what your total load of mercury going in is.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought. So for somebody who is eating fish, what is there a limit, sort of per week that people should be consuming, even if they're eating lower on the food chain?
I measured mercury on a guy who eats sardines, anchovies, and kippers, a little bit of that every day, and he had like super, super low mercury. Right. So it depends where you eat from.
So the food chain.
No more than 2 servings of fish. Well, 1 serving of swordfish is enough for a month and a half. And 1 serving of, a real small fish is doing nothing to you.
Gotcha.
So you have to look at, because, and it's more important for these people who are really like, I can't eat the hoof. Like Tony Robbins, who was the most famous case that I helped. And he went from being a vegan to doing a paleo thing. Now, you're a vegan, you're going to paleo, you can't eat animal. You just can't wrap your head around that. You can't eat of the hoof, but you can eat of the fin because that's, barely an animal. And so he started eating fish, just tons of it all day, but all he ate, and he thought he'd get it in from a nice spiritual, clean place like Hawaii. And I don't want it from like close to the ocean because heavy metals all sink because they're heavy, right? Yeah. And so this was somebody's thinking around him, maybe his trainer or something. And so he was flying in tuna and swordfish from Hawaii, and Hawaii is like one of the highest mercury places on the planet.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's just the volcanic activity and everything coming off of China rains down there, and you get a lot of mercury. And so he was just eating salad and fish all day long. He had one of the highest levels I ever measured. So the guy who's eating kippers every day and anchovies and sardines, his level was like 1.5 parts per billion in his blood. Tony Robbins was 125. So he was 100 times higher than this guy by eating fish. That's 100 to 1,000 times higher in mercury.
What other sources of mercury are? I mean, where else is this coming from in the environment?
Dental amalgams is the other big one, and it's almost you can get a higher load of mercury from the fish, but the amalgams are really insidious because they're in there all the time. They have a form that there's a vapor coming out of it. Like, you play with mercury back in the old days, these little silver balls that float around.
Yeah.
The only metal that's got a liquid phase at room temperature and pressure. And so that means there's also a vapor phase not far behind it. So there's vapor of that coming off all the time. Yeah. So even though they get it hard by mixing it with silver in the teeth, there's still vapor coming off of it, especially when you chew. When you drink hot liquids, more comes off. And this is being inhaled and going right into the blood through your lungs. And while it's still this vapor form, before it oxidizes to a salt form, it can go right across the blood-brain barrier. Then when it oxidizes in there, it really sticks in there. So when I'm measuring your blood levels, I don't know how much is in your brain.
Gotcha.
It's just decoupled. The blood, the methylmercury, the blood is representative of the brain because it goes in and out. But inorganic, it goes in as one form, changes to another form, and takes a long time to come out. Now, at the same time, there's also, it's rusting in your mouth, it's corroding, and you're swallowing that. Now, when you swallow that, it's not that you absorb that and it goes into your blood. It's more that that is a corrosive and pro-inflammatory salt that's going through your GI tract, and it's coating your whole GI tract, and it's inhibiting the movement of more mercury from your liver down into the GI. It seems to, we haven't worked out the mechanism, but it seems to have a sensor switch that is saying, no, you've moved too much mercury down here already. You got to kind of hold up on that.
Yeah.
Because once we get those out of the mouth and clear the GI tract, boom, all this mercury just starts flowing out. So you have one form that's going in through your lungs and polluting you, and then another form that's dripping down your mouth and blocking your detox system. So that one's really bad chronically and long term. And then when you throw on like a high load thing like the fish, then it's working into that same broken system.
Yeah. Are there any other toxins that you're really concerned about right now? We touched on this a little bit last time, but I just watched the I don't know if you've seen the Devil We Know documentary about DuPont and Teflon.
Oh, they are bad, man. Fluorinated stuff is bad.
It's on Netflix, but yeah, I mean they're talking about all the fluorinated stuff. They call it C8 or PFOA.
Yeah. Fluorinated octanoic acid.
And now they're creating their own that's called Gen X, as if we didn't get enough crap.
Like a generation of fluorinated people. So all the halogens produce terrible compounds. So you have all these, like you have oil and then you put light to it and it burns, right? So they wanted to make all this stuff that didn't burn.
Right.
And so they take all the electron density away from it, and they do that by halogenating it. And so the first things were the chlorinated things, like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and those were to be lubricants like oil that would be in high temperature areas and not catch on fire. And they're like, okay, these things work great. Well, because they don't catch on fire, nothing can actually break them down. So you don't have any microbes that can break them down. You have an oil spill, the microbes will eat the damn thing eventually. You know, I mean, yeah, you've laid waste to a lot of stuff, but eventually it'll all be consumed. It's just organic matter. But polychlorinated stuff, like nothing knows how to eat it. You know, maybe some extremophiles, and so this stuff lasts forever. And then it gets into the system and it sticks onto hormone receptors and it throws all that stuff out of whack. You know, Agent Orange was in that world. DDT, all these things were, you know, better living through chemistry. Oops. Then flame retardants, they started brominating those. So the PDBEs, I forget or PBDEs, polybrominated diphenyl ethers. So they put those all over kids' clothing and kids' bedding because we didn't want the kid to burn up. Oops, we wrecked his whole hormone system.
Right.
Yay. And those things don't go away. And those were all through the, you know, all these build up in the waterways where they're made. Because
that's what they were getting into. And they
waterway, so you can dump everything into the water like we do in China, like we used to do here. And then all along those waterways, what happens? You have collapse of populations. And because these are all endocrine disruptors, and what was happening? The fish and the birds, they forgot who to have sex with. And so there was this whole, you think transgender's an issue now? You should have been a frog back in the 70s and 80s. Man, there was, see this, you know, all this stuff happened a long time ago in the environment, and then we stopped all the dumping, and the populations came back, but there was this whole gender dysmorphia thing going on with all these animals. And then we got the fluorinated stuff, and nothing sticks around like a fluorinated compound. And so the Teflon compounds, the perfluorinated octanoic acids and all these other fluorinated things, those, they call them persistent organic pollutants. They're persistent because nothing can break them down. Fluorinated compounds, Teflon, remember, nothing sticks to it. Really hard to break down. So now it's in your body, and you need an enzyme system to break into that and make it reactive so you can link a glutathione onto that and then move it out of the system. But the fluorinated ones are really hard to work on. And one group of people that's notoriously injured by fluorine toxicity are anesthesiologists.
Oh, is that right?
Anesthesia. So this whole drug thing, I work on making all these super high bioavailability things, but a lot of them, they go, wow, I got 100 times increase in bioavailability, boom, it's gone in an hour and a half. And it's like, oh wow, how about that? And then you look at the half-life of this compound's really fast. And then you look at the drugs, the half-life's really slow. And then you look at what these drugs are made out of, and they started halogenating the drugs, so you couldn't break them down, so they'd last for a long time.
Is that right?
All these polypharmacy toxicities. And so the anesthesias, you don't want anesthesia to wear off, right? So they fluorinated all the anesthesias. So the guys who administer them, they get ridiculously toxic. There's a guy named Matt Cook who's one of the more famous doctors in the regenerative anti-aging biohacker world. Yeah. And I first met him 7 years ago, and he would look like a gray lizard. And he was an anesthesiologist. He wanted to get out of that. And he started doing all this detox to get rid of it. And it took him a couple of years to get all that stuff out. Like, Mercury, I can get you clean in a couple of months. Yeah. Fluorinated stuff, this is going to take a while. And now he looks fantastic, but he had to get over all that. So there are a lot of organic chemicals out there that are a real big deal. A lot of people are really worried about Roundup. I know it's definitely bad, and it's an excitotoxin. It's a glutamate activator. Glyphosate, it's not as bad to me by leaps and bounds as these halogenated ones, but it's in much high, like molecule for molecule, it's nowhere to
right.
But it's just all over the freaking place.
Yeah.
So the load of it is high, and thus it becomes a problem.
And is it a very different process then to try to get rid of that stuff?
Yeah, it is a very different process. It's much easier to get rid of the glyphosates. You do any of our detox system, you see your glyphosate levels go down, fast, month, 2 months.
So does your company do both kind of working with heavy metals and with some of this, these other things, or the plastics and things that get caught in the body?
We aren't doing the testing for all these other things, but it's all the same. So in that phase 2, that conjugation reaction, maybe you're not using glutathione for this other compound. There's 3 main ones you use: glutathione, glucuronic acid, and sulfate. Okay. There's a couple other ones you tack on, but those are the main ones. And so you've got glutathione as transferase for glutathione. You've got sulfotransferase for sulfate. And this is one of the targets of glyphosate, is blocking that. Okay. And then you've got glucuronyl transferase for blending glucuronic acid. So mold toxins tend to be more on the glucuronyl transferase. Okay. But the big triggers to turn them all on are the same. Gotcha. Okay. NRF2 is a big trigger to bring all those things up. Yeah, one trigger will be a little better at, they don't really understand why this is better at glutathionase transferase upregulation, this is better at glucuronyl transferase upregulation. But it's not like you only take one of those and turn it on. It might be a little, 30% higher on glutathionase transferase. So any good detoxification will address all things. Now, we might have to bring in some other adjuncts. If we're doing mold where you need more binders throughout the day, maybe we'll do this push-catch thing, the activate and catch, and we'll do that twice a day, but we'll take some of the binder 2 other times a day, because mold is notorious for this reuptake, so you need a lot of binder. You need to really be draining a lot of this bile and all the toxins out of it. So you look at different ways to modulate it, but it's not like this is a mercury detox and mercury alone. Back when we were using chelators, it was that way.
Right.
Not in this way. And I came on the scene sort of as chelators were king, and I was like, this is totally wrong.
Yeah.
Not totally wrong.
Yeah.
But fix the underlying system. And a lot of people use our system, and then if they want to throw a little DMPS or DMSA on top of that, they can do that. But on a broken system, that stuff's not going to fix you.
Right, because you're trying to give support to what's inhibited, right? Isn't that kind of the first step?
Building the whole thing up. I mean, some people it's load dependent. I just took too much mercury.
Gotcha.
But most of the time, it's a chronic load and a chronic dysregulation or a down regulation of the detox system. Those two coupled together. And when we bring up the detox system, you dump the load down and you can handle what's going on. And you're going to want to diminish how much is coming in, but you can do it by just bringing up the activity at the detox system.
Right. So kind of wrapping this back around to the autonomics again. We're really trying to, I mean, depending on what the load is for a person, then they may need to really focus on those kinds of things that are going to, influence, their sort of, bring up their parasympathetics, and also at the same time support whatever is inhibited in their system. And they may need to have, like, depending on if they have a high load, they may need to have periods of rest. I mean, I think, or like what we talked about last time, which is that, movement, sometimes people are so used to sort of exercising at this high intensity, but sometimes we need to do something parasympathetic in movement.
Parasympathetic movement for sure. The movement is just essential to getting the lymphatics flowing. As the toxins come out, they tend to lock up the lymphatics because the body reacts to them. So you need to keep those going. You need to keep everything moving out, but you need to keep in this calm space. And as we said last time, people are like, I'm going to work out. I'm going to do some power yoga, which makes you totally sympathetic, and you're working against yourself. So I often use the term parasympathetic sweating, so maybe that's a sauna, or it's exercise, but it's just brought with a mindfulness and a calmness as you do the exercise, like a light jog, I see this with my son as a type 1 diabetic. And when he plays soccer, so if you just exercise, you just go run around the lake, Pierre. His blood sugar's high. He just walks around the lake, let alone run. The blood sugars come down. He goes out and plays soccer, and he's all, they go up. Because it's a sympathetic activity. You're not, you may be sweating, but you're not engaging the rest of the thing. So bring that all around. Don't waste your money on the detox supplements unless you're committed to getting your brain in the right space for doing it, and creating a ritual around it, not doing a magic pill thing. And you bring those two together, it'll work like a charm. Like when we put people on cardiometabolic stuff, we have this stuff that puts you into ketosis. Well, also intermittent fast, and let those lifestyle things come together. So while you're already fasted, 14 hours, you take this stuff, it really supercharges that activity altogether. We talk about detox. Now, while you've gotten yourself in a calm space, put the detox stuff in, get your movement going. While that's happening, you got this 30-minute period. You're going to activate stuff, then you're going to catch it and terminate it with the binder in that 30-minute period. Saunas, the light exercise, the meditation, the foot baths, whatever you're going to do, put that in the middle so these lifestyle factors are supporting your detox factors. And really, intermittent fasting while you're doing that too is helping that a lot too, because this AMPK activation, that's what's activated when you exercise or when you carb fast or you're doing keto, that plays into the detox picture as well. So you overlap these things, you commit to it, you get in the right headspace, and you get so much more done.
And is there something kind of intermittently that people could do with a detox program? Do you have any for yourself? Is there anything you do?
Oh yeah, I mean, I weave all this stuff together all the time. Now, I like a good construct for it is there's time for a formal detox, and then there's intermittent detox.
Mm-hmm.
So the formal detox, we're gonna have you on for 1 to 3 months. You'll be doing 5 days on, 2 days off, or 10 days on, 4 days off. Think stimulate the drainage, relax,
Mm-hmm.
stimulate it, relax, and you're going to go through these cycles, and we're going to be taking layer after layer, different, nests of things coming out. And then there's intermittent, weekend warrior. Really, that push catch system, that's a little detox all on its own. You can do that once, and you could do that maybe, a few times a week, or on the weekend, maybe twice a day, 2 days in a row. You've done this intermittent detox. That could just plug in any time. And it used to be, it was really, we built up over a couple of days and then we calmed you down. But since we tied it all together, we coupled the cellular to the liver, we've got the autonomics controlled, we've got the binder. It's boom, you have a little 1 hour session of detox.
Yeah.
And so those are the two end members, a single cycle or a formal one, and then anything in between.
Yeah, I like the way you sort of structure the formal ones, because I think there are times where I feel like this when I'm working with clients sometimes, there's a tendency to sort of overdo in the beginning and not have those sort of like push-pull that kind of, work the system a little bit, let it find stasis again, push it again a little bit, let it find stasis. Because you have to kind of, it's an intelligent system. I mean, I think we lose track of that part of things and don't trust the brilliance of these systems that we have. But it's almost kind of like they need to be exercised and trained and
no, it is. And so it's funny. I have like a 5-time national or international triathlete as a client now, and she can't stand, not giving back. And so she's making me exercise. She's putting me on this program. And so she goes, and the big mistake people make is to try to go too hard too quick. So I'm going to start slow, a minute of running, minute of walking, minute of running, minute of walking, and then go up higher. And so what do we call that in dosing? Titration of dosing. Yeah. And so we have a level 1, a level 2, a level 3. You can start a half a level 1. So we're going to start you at low doses, start exercising that system, and then go to higher doses. Now that it's engaged, the genes are more readily accessible. The enzyme systems are used to going on, off. There's this whole way that you access this stuff. And you got to dig into genes. You have to transcribe them. You got to make a protein. They got to be used to, the whole mechanism has to be used to turning off or turning on and then calming down and then coming back on. And so as you exercise this, you're moving up to higher and higher doses, and then you can come down to a maintenance to run it for a while.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this is a lot for some people, but I feel like this is the groundwork of what I kind of want people to understand. I like the way we started last time, where we basically said, as little as possible with all these things, and really thinking about how we balance our, thinking about this from a lifestyle perspective first. And I think that we should, that should go hand in hand with a program like this. And that's one of the things that gets missed too often. And I love that you preach that, because, in the product world, there's way too many cults of personality and way too many people, singing praises of things that really don't have very much testing.
No, they're like, this one thing, this little pill, do it all. You're all good. Yeah, no, it's very program oriented. We started something after quarantine called the Quarantine Recovery Program. And it was a month of detox, a month of detox mixed with metabolic activation, and a month of mitochondrial support. And in reality, there was some of every one of that through it, but it was a relative ratio of the two that you went through. And we drip fed videos for lifestyle support in, and now you might be feeling this, and you should think about doing these things with your diet. And it was this whole support to bring bring this whole system, bring it into your lifestyle. And that was the first time we had done that. We really want to do a lot more of these programs and, lead people into how to live around this.
Yeah. It's funny that one of my first voiceover gigs that I almost got was when I was living in New York. One of my clients, I'd worked with her for a long time. She worked mostly in advertising in the pharmaceutical industry. So they were starting this program to go alongside an RA medicine, a rheumatoid arthritis medicine. And because I was sort of part in the fitness world at the time, they wanted somebody who was in that to do the voiceover for this thing. And it was basically a program of exercise, that would go along with the medication. And I was like, if they gave that to everybody with every medication, they would always do better. Why are they not doing this? This is like 15 years ago, but
think about, something, like metformin, which is really a good medicine. It's a metabolic medicine. It's really a great thing. Think if they preached some intermittent fasting, some dietary control, and exercise with that, it's like diabetes would be done,
I know.
Maybe that's the problem.
Well, that's it. The answer is almost always simpler than we like to make it out to be.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. This was fun. I enjoyed getting to go deeper with you on all this stuff. And if there's anything new that comes along the line, I'd love to have you back again. And sure. We'll have your info for people who are thinking they may be struggling with toxicity issues. Is there someone that or a first step that you recommend? Do you talk to people about having certain kinds of tests done or going to functional medicine docs for this?
Yeah, functional medicine doctors are usually good for that. We specialize in the metal side of the testing. The functional medicine docs might get you some of the other tests that are going on out there. Testing can be a pricey thing, so it's always kind of a tough thing. It's, knowing what the demon is good, but there's a lot of toxins. You can't test them all. So sometimes this one, you might think it's all about this one. So testing is a double-edged sword. If you can afford it, always do it. If you can't, then you're thinking, do I treat? And often it's good to just go in and treat with these detox systems. And because they'll clear out a lot of metabolic toxins, there's a lot of AMPK activation, which is like fasting mimetic, exercise mimetic. And if you couple it with getting on top of your diet and getting on top of some regular exercise and movement, you can really sometimes clear away a lot of junk and really start feeling a lot better.
Yeah. That's a great reminder. All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Take care. We'll talk again.
Okay, sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Christopher Shade, folks. If you're new to these concepts or working on a detox challenge and just starting to learn, I suggest going back through this one again at some point. You'll be more familiar with the terms next time, and the concepts will start to fit into place. You can also learn more at his company's website, quicksilverscientific.com. I should also mention that Quicksilver is offering listeners of the show 15% off all products except for their multi-product line until January 31st, 2021, using the code HTH2020. That's HTH for Highwayto.health, 2020. Let me know what you thought of this topic and conversation. You can get in touch with me anytime by email, jeremy@highwayto.health. Thanks for listening and for all that you do. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and take care of your planet. Be well, my friends.